Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for making time and joining us. My name is Luyando Mulea. I'm a cultural worker. I'm also an emerging curator and also a researcher based here in Livingston District. My practice examines endogenous systems and technologies of transmission, especially those that are rooted in initiation. I use the exhibition, peer education models, and social practice to bring to fore oppressed epistemologies. Today, we're having our conversation number 1 for collective cares. I, Luyando Mulea, and Naoko Maben have been having conversations since August in wanting to build collective cares. Hopefully, we'll participate in this conversation and share our feedbacks. Also note that this conversation is being recorded and we hope to use the recordings for YouTube. So please feel free, feel comfortable, and please do contribute, as your contributions are necessary and will help in building our identity and also our trajectory. So thank you so much again for sharing and for joining the conversation. Hopefully it becomes alive more from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leandro. Hi, my name is Naoko Maybon. I am a freelance art curator based in Scotland. I'm originally from Japan. Essentially, I think I'm interested in making connections or relationships, but also those things will respond to our collective or local or global issues we face today. I try to use art or my skills to generate social change. Yeah, I'm so excited to have this space with you. Thank you so much for your time and your views that you will share today. Thank you.
Also, even in making this space interactive, perhaps we may open up the space to just perhaps listen to people who are on this call, just briefly introduce themselves and also just briefly share some of the views that they've heard or what they think so far about collective cares. Just some contributions, some views of what people are expecting from today and also what they feel or rather how they view collective cares.
Hi everyone, I can maybe just go on. My name is Kabila. It's good to join this conversation. I work as a curator and yeah, I follow the conversation on the collective care process, how it goes, and I'm willing to see how better perspective may happen, in the future. As I think many we know that art is not just about the making of the object, but also the people who make it. I think from a context of the continent, to address the care question, it's essential, especially after so-called transgenerational traumas that the continent's people carry with. I think it is interesting to try to open up this conversation and see how art may advance as a platform. Collective is a community, is a community building, is individuals with their potential, but how it's manifest. I'm curious about the manifestation of those individualities and so yeah. That's what I can say, just like for starting. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chibuya. I'm a writer and mediator with a policy background, currently based in Brussels, but grew up in Zambia and in Ndola specifically. I think my interest as an art practitioner in a way is really about the ecosystem of makers, and how not only do they produce their work, but the worlds in which they produce their work. I think a big part of my writing so far has really been capturing that, interested in not just the art that artists are making, but why they make their art and in which context they do so, that's perhaps universal. I think with collective cares, that interest also continues specifically for Zambia, and thinking perhaps about how we can make those systems of world building more evident in artists' practices, in the way we think about art in the Zambian context, but also in the way that artists can cultivate their practices, in a contextual way. So yeah, really keen to see how perhaps an ecosystem within collective cares could foster that or support that. Yeah.
Hello. But lovely to meet Ichibuye, Kabila. We know each other, Joa. And thanks for convening this meeting. For the last few years, as the Women's History Museum, we've been really asking and interrogating this whole premise and framework of how meaning making is done, especially around museum production, cultural production, especially with our own specific on indigenous knowledge and how the colonial legacies impacted how we translate and understand our knowledge systems. So this particular conversation is interesting for me because we're setting about building a foundation and refreshing the framework through which knowledge is produced. And I'm interested to understand how Zambian artists, Zambian curators, Zambian cultural makers, or creative makers understand and translate the work they're engaging with and interacting with. So in a selfish way, this is actually valuable for us, but in the much more broader sense, I think it's important to interrogate the establishment as it stands now within Zambia and how we then present ourselves to the world and start thinking around how we can think anew. Yeah.
Okay, so I think our starting point for the conversation and also with the agenda that we had, I'll start on the fragmentation. I think one of the reasons why we had started the conversation with collective cares is the potential that Zambian expressions have, but also the fragmentation that is around in the art scene. So collective care starts from noticing how artists are struggling to find like local audiences for dialogue, and also opportunities here in Zambia feel scarce, and also they feel very competitive. And also I think there's not a kind of central nervous system that connects the Zambian nervous system, the Zambian art scene. And that's why we want to engage in, or rather start with collective cares. So we're positioning collective cares as a kind of response to the fragmentation, the competitiveness, the way that you feel like certain opportunities and resources are scarce. So we're introducing collective cares not necessarily as a platform, but a peer-led ecosystem built on an idea that is framing curation as an act of care. So even as I continue, perhaps Naoko, you'd like to weigh in how we're wanting to define care and also wanting to identify contemporary arts, and just some of the definitions that we've put up in our glossary so that it's also clear as we're wanting to introduce this project.
Well, in the glossary, we have three key words or terms, because those three words have really different interpretations depending on people or how they take it. So first one is contemporary art. We think that it's a way to think about art beyond what is beautiful or who has genius, and then rather to think critically and pose questions. And it is an effective tool to make visible, heard, or felt, as well as to respond to the complexity of today's pressing issues, while leading actions and subsequent social change towards an even more just and sustainable world for present and upcoming generations. And the second word is care. We take this word as a way to responsibly maintain various lives within an interdependent network. But actually, care is a not innocent practice because if we think about, for instance, if you're maintaining a garden and if you're growing one plant, you sometimes need to kill the pest or you need to weed. So to kill, you care something you care for. The point is, I think this caregiver need to bear in mind that what kind of power they have. They have a power or influence over other lives. And so the key is to facilitate and listen carefully to what kind of ecosystem is there, and bear in that mind to take care of things. That one thing is not exist just one like independent things. It's actually exist in the sometimes invisible web of interdependency. The third word is curation. It has a root in the Latin word cura, which means concern, attention, care, cure, responsibility, farming, military command. This practice of curation historically associated with management or restoration of museum collections from the mid-17th century. Curation has operated in the culture of nation state and capitalism based on or entangled with colonialism and patriarchy. To challenge this traditional power dynamics in the curatorial practice, claiming its own roots, in this initiative, we want to see curation as a practice of care. But it's super open to discussions. These are not set ideas. We can update anytime.
Yeah, and I think in building our conversation, even building from the definition of our 3 words in our glossary, I think our structure is peer-led, and that is one of the things that we're wanting to identify collective cares, the fact that our structure is peer-led, and in wanting to even break down what it means to be peer-led. I think it's not necessarily a top-down initiative, as Naoko is echoing. To be peer-led, I think for us means that the direction, the features on our website, the conversations that we host are all driven by the growing community of practitioners and curators. So ideally, we are heavily engaging the growing network of peers, and I'm hoping that as we 34 minutes into the conversation, I'm hoping that even as we engage other voices to want to shape our identity, to want to shape the same conversation, to be interesting to listen to views about how, like right now, the arts in Zambia look like, or even the contemporary arts in Zambia manifest. In defining like contemporary arts in the way Naoko is defining it, I think most of us here have worked with the Zambian context, either working directly with the Zambian context or have worked with the Zambian context. I'm relatively new to the contemporary art scene. I did a co-curated exhibit. The first co-curated exhibition I participated in was last year, while I was participating in a curatorial fellowship here in Livingston at the Livingston Office for Contemporary Arts. So I'm relatively new, and Naoko would also mention that she's relatively new to the Zambian art scene, as she only did a 1-month residency at Lukak just this year. But we have Samba, who's been working with the Zambian art scene for some years. She's one of the very experienced curators that we're seeking wisdom and guidance from. KB has also been working with the Livingston Office of Contemporary Arts and also the Zambian art scene for a while now. So with Loka, I think since 2021, he's been participating in exhibitions. Also, Chibuya has been doing lots of writings with the Everyday Lusaka. So it would be interesting to first hear from your views, working with the Zambian art scene. Like what are what are some of the thoughts, or rather, what are some of the prevailing conversations that are being had that you feel are necessary, that could be interrogated with or engaged with in the collective chaos framework that we're wanting to work with?
For me, it's really an encounter of excitement for what can be done and what actually happens when we engage with our own context. The work that I've done with Everyday Lusaka, for example, is really exemplary to not only my interest, but also to what I see happens when we truly engage with our own context. Perhaps also what I didn't mention in my introduction is really my interest, and it kind of also explains my own background in policy, working on topics that are grounded in history and in post-colonial discourse, in understanding kind of where we're from and how that has impacted who we are. This is for me the grander question, and also kind of the meaning making that art actually does. I think quite broadly about the use of art and how it is a tool rather than a thing on its own to connect us to each other, but also to ourselves. And in the Zambian context, I've been excited for what art could actually do for this kind of collective idea of rooting us in ourselves and giving us understanding of who we are. That being said, there's then also kind of a restriction, perhaps, and I don't want to see it as deterministic as seeing it as a restriction. I think what I see is a space for growth rather than a restriction. So also why I kind of lead this conversation with always curiosity, to be like, okay, these are perhaps gaps we can identify, but that only means that there's so much that can be done. And in the curatorial space, I think that means, for example, thinking about how exactly it is that we could cultivate artistic practice that would allow for that kind of growth and rooting and creating within our own spaces. What else to add to that is that I think in Zambia, what is exciting, particularly for me in the topics that I'm interested in, is that we are a relatively young nation, and a lot of our understanding and evolving is ongoing, which again, I think is exciting. I have been so excited, for example, even when I found out about the Women's Museum a couple of years back, and just how inspiring those stories could be, like learning so much about how we are really manifests in ways that is really individual. What people take away from the institutionalization or the rather opening up of these histories and spaces and practices, I think is really powerful beyond, again, just the art for art's sake kind of thing. And so for Zambian art making, I'm really interested in how curators can play a big part in kind of weaving out or seeking out artists who really want to build a body of work around these topics, and whether it's topics that just interact with our own becoming and belonging, but also topics that thread us through the contemporaneous that is the time that we live in now. I think that is what makes it interesting. And again, I keep seeing limitations also as opportunity, because unlike perhaps other countries, the lack of institution also means that you can actually approach people on an eye level, perhaps. I'm a naive optimist in that sense, so I hope you bear with me. But I really do always kind of think about possibility in that kind of context, and perhaps also an element of practicality. Like if things don't work, the question then for me is, should they actually work? And maybe then there should be other ways to do it. I think my encounter with Zambian contemporary art, or what Zambian contemporary art could mean, is that there's so much to do, that is actually exciting, and it would be really exciting actually to build those spaces, or even at least connections, for people to come with those questions of how it is exactly that practice can be cultivated, or how it is exactly that curators could particularly play a role. And I see the curators also as a wider thing, not just like the individuals, but it's the entire ecosystem of writers, of elders, of people that have certain skills that then can actually connect artists beyond just their artistic practice. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I wanted also just to follow up. I guess from my perspective, I always think that sometimes it's even better, rather than looking at Zambia as a space, as a political space, try to open it more. Because for me, those are like very recent geographies. How then can we look at other type of geographies, which are involved with the reality of the ground of what we think that Zambia exists today? I think it's better to always look at it from a regional perspective, I guess, than it's given a broad vision of who are the people living there, what are they producing, and how they take care of what they produce. In general, I think that for me, the contemporaneity of what the people make or what they produce as art is always wealth, but people don't want to see it like that. Unfortunately, it's always important to recognize that as soon as anybody produce a sculpture, it can be anything that a maker, an artist produce. I think he produced wealth. But how then do the people surrounding him give more value to it? I think that go beyond the geography of just like state nation today from a political perspective. But it's also interesting to look at it from traditional perspectives. What are other geographies that are not applying more in Zambia? And what could be the possibilities of activating them? Those for me are the things that interest me. What are the potential of activations in Zambia in connecting with other geographies as the Great Lake, the Big Congo, Namibia, Zimbabwe, South Africa? For me, there we may breathe differently in Zambia. It can be even like a refreshment of the arts in itself. It's got a lot of potential, and I think it's a duty of the people living there and giving the time to be able to reappreciate the value of what we produce and how we sell it. And for me, the market is not just like in terms of economical, but it's also the meaning, the knowledge. Which type of economy of knowledge do we have around what we produce? We need to write more. It's needed. We need to produce more knowledge about what we produce by our own. That's important. We don't have to expect values coming from elsewhere. The elsewhere don't exist. You have to take it in charge. I'm saying it with a bit of pain because sometimes even in our own African countries, we are unable to accommodate, we have to be able to accommodate the value of what we produce and appreciate it, to elevate it. Because to create something, it is a work of spirit, it is a work of God. When we do that job, then we have to give it the right value and say, this is what it adds as value. Speculate on it, we have the right. We have the right. I always say that you give the value to what you do. Don't wait for anybody to give the value to what you produce. That's important, I guess. Um, but backing on the care, I think it's also important to think that the makers are also part of the making, the act of the making. And it's important to acknowledge and to take care of the artists, not just as people who produce, but more as people who, by them producing, they allow us to see the world differently than the way we see it every day. They offer us an opportunity to see differently. And I guess that's an important work which has to be acknowledged and keep it on. That's very important, I guess. Yeah. That's what I would love to contribute to. So,
Thank you so much, Heavy. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on as well, but also to ask a question. Because this year I've had the privilege, I think over the last couple of years, not just this year, I mean, including listening to you, Naoko, at Lukac, Luyando, interacting with you in Livingston that was last year, right? In August. And just understanding the landscape of what is happening in the particularly in the art sector, because my background is not art or even culture, it's communication. So we've come to the creative and art sector because we noticed a gap in the cultural knowledge production space. And as a result of that, we have encountered artists and cultural workers and creatives who are already working in this space or venturing in this space or are curious about it. And I think for us, the interesting demographic is the ones who are curious, the ones who interpret their creative work with gaps in it. And sometimes they interpret this work without understanding that they have a gap in their knowledge. And sometimes they interpret it understanding they have a gap and wanting to address it. So that's the interesting intersection that we have found ourselves at, because then we have artists, creatives, even just regular people, interested people coming to us and saying, but how do we find out information about this? Or did we ever have this and that in our history? How come we don't know anything about this? And those are the kind of questions that we're trying to solve for. And in that solving those questions, obviously more questions come about, like, who are we creating for? I think that's something I've always been curious about for I'll say Zambian, but this makes sense because when I've been to ArtX Lagos, I've been to South Africa, Zimbabwe, and interestingly enough, connecting with those artists at some level, there's a through line. There's a core understanding. I mean, Kabila, even you when I spoke to you in Livingston, and the work that you were referencing was deeply involved with your indigenous knowledge from where you come from. And dare I say, a lot of Zambians struggle with that. Not that all of them are dealing with that, but it's something that I found interesting because having gone to Artex, having gone to these other spaces, Zambians are also missing from there. So I'm like, how do we get Zambians to these spaces where everyone else is having conversations and conversations in an interesting way? I'm particularly interested for the continent as well, because then it allows for a different way of meaning making. And I ask for who because I for who and why and what, because I don't know if you have heard the controversy that has happened with the Benin bronzes in Benin City with Moa, right? So I was actually supposed to speak at Moa that day that happened, and we had flown to Benin City to be part of the conversation and be part of the opening of Moa. Needless to say, everything was canceled. So we ended up spending 2 days there and having conversations about what happened. And it's still emerging as two sides of the story. The side of the story where the institution is supposed to be a front-facing institution for West African contemporary art. And when you dig deeper, we're understanding that that was what MOA's partners wanted for MOA. Especially after the Benin bronzes now no longer were going to be in the museum, because initially the Benin bronzes were eventually going to end up in MOA, in the MOA museum. But because there was now this cultural ownership aspect of the Benin bronzes actually belonging to the Oba and Benin City, they didn't go to MOA. And that is what culminated into the friction. And if you are listening to the story, there's two sides to the story, and there's no effort to reconcile the two to show that on both sides that there are issues, right? Because if in 1897 your city, your kingdom was looted and the bronzes were taken from there and they went somewhere else, and 100 years later, you're the one who's still deciding where the bronzes should go, that's a problem, right? And on the other side, the institution that is on the ground, which is MOA, which is being run by Nigerians, and that is supposed to be front facing for the community as well, but is saying that the institution is not about, essentially, they're saying the institution is broader than the community, right? And we're focusing more on the partners and what the global standard is. So in that space, there's conflict already, because are you pandering to what the global standard wants and not defining for yourself how this reconciliation should work, how you should interact with the locals so that you can find a solution? So who are you doing this for? And even when you do create this art or provide this institution or provide a platform, how authentic is it if there is no clarity around the who, the what, and the why? So I think these are some of the conversations that are important to have as well, so that we also don't end up replicating things like what has happened with MOA and their indigenous partners or their local partners. I don't know if that makes sense.
And I think it's really interesting what you're saying about how we make and for who. And in the scenario of the Benin bronzes, like, yeah, that was hectic. I kind of also was surprised that was never a conversation had. That it was very clear this rather transfer from Europe to Africa, actually, and that the Europeans were the ones who were deciding how exactly it was that these objects should even be conserved. But I mean, perhaps in the case of Zambia, I don't know how far the restitution conversation has come in Zambia. I would be interested to know, Samba, if that's something that that's a conversation had about Zambian objects. But beyond objects specifically, I do think the question of how we're creating and for who really distinguishes not just how we make work, how we communicate about work, but also the spaces, how accessible the spaces are. For me as a writer, me and Sana always joke about this curatorial finessing with texts, for example, that that we've always been very deliberate about the texts that we write for exhibitions, that they should be written to be understood by the people who are viewing them. And it shouldn't just be this exercise that the curator is now, going in with jargon, but rather really communicating a story that is meant for the public to actually understand and grasp and even learn from. So I when you're talking, that resonates for me in terms of asking the question, for who are we creating and how do we create it? For me, it's come up in text, how we actually communicate. And even in the curatorial process and thinking about what it is exactly an exhibition should communicate, the messaging, at least in the brainstorming between San and I, has always been, art and what about it, kind of. Why is this exhibition particularly interesting or should be interesting for the public? So that, I think, already distinguishes what kind of shows that I then even put on, and how the work is digested, but also translated to the public. But the other question that I also have with that topic is, there's also this institutional element, and I think the project, also has this other side, like, and I wonder how far those conversations have gone. Like, is there still this intent to affect the institutional element of this? Yeah.
I was just going to reflect with you, Chibuye, about that. And I think while we were in Benin City, a large group of us sat and asked those same questions that you're asking. And the thing I wanted to add to the statement that I made, and especially listening to your reflection, is like, I think sometimes because we're encountering these massive global institutions that have had a set way of producing art or producing knowledge, I think for a long time, needless to say, and also understandably, we've had to comply and conform and contort ourselves in order to fit into these silos that have been created around knowledge production and artistic expression. And even looking at the MOA leadership, they seemed very taken aback and surprised that the community pushed back and essentially said, "You're not going to force us to do this thing that you're trying to force us to do." And as much as we talk about the institution that we have to conform to, I think there's the added layer of work that we need to do ourselves to interrogate ourselves. And I think that is the point where we're always at in terms of understanding how we need to reframe and rebuild what the institution looks like for us. There was even finally today I saw a report, because obviously there's a lot of news articles that have been published about the incident that happened, and a lot of them initially when they were published, and this might seem innocuous, but it's very powerful, because if you think about how global media operates and how much it influences how we think and how we act, and you saw it happening in real time as this thing was happening, because us who were there knew exactly what was happening, but what was being reported, particularly in the Western media, was a side of this story, not the full story. And when you're listening to what is being reported, you're like, no, that's not, like, that's part of the truth, but that's not the full truth. So what you're doing is indoctrinating people to understand that it only happened in one way. And it was so easy to see the leadership of Moa as well. And again, understandably so, because some of them are close friends of mine, wanting to emerge as if they did the right thing. No one was willing to be like, okay, we all need to come to the table and fix this thing that clearly all of us did not do right. And I think it's okay for us to stop in the moment where we feel uncomfortable. And we've all been at those tables, we've all been in those rooms where we are brought into an opportunity, or we see an opportunity and then have this thing where we're like, well, I think for this opportunity to work, we must align like this. It feels uncomfortable. I think in those, and see if there's another way to do it. And for me, this collective that is being formed now it should look at those kind of things, because then it will attempt to do things differently rather than repeating the same processes that we normally find ourselves in. I think that's something I would challenge ourselves in this collective to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Samba, for sharing. Thank you very much. I think it's a paranoid thought that I have on the viability of collective cares, and also if it's just wanting to ask.
Sorry to interrupt, Leander, but just to notice that Sana actually has joined the call.
Oh yeah. Oh, hi, Sana. How are you doing? Sorry, I didn't notice that.
No worries, no worries. I've just been listening. Hi, everybody. Hi, everyone. KB, nice to see you, KB, after so long. But yeah, I'm sorry I'm late, but yeah, please continue, Leandro. I'm here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing and welcome. Yeah, I was going to ask about just to throw it out. Does some of the things that you raise in the collective cares proposal, do they sound naive and do they sound viable? That's a paranoia that I don't know if I share with Naoko, but even as we head into, yeah, I think Naoko talking about what we're wanting to do and what we're actually doing right now, but just wanting to find out if it feels very, if it feels naive to anybody else, and also if some of the questions we're raising, some of the concerns that we're raising are viable, and how we may even go about, making realistic steps at growing the collective network. Yeah.
Just to the Samba's point, if that's okay. Sorry, Leandro. To whom we do this for? I think that's very important question to think about and then also to answer. And I am very aware that my position or my existence for this initiative is a very odd one. I am very aware of it because I'm not from Zambia, just visited once, and the one visit was powerful enough to inspire me, which is true. But it's in a way, it's not my place to maybe to participate. I guess. Yeah, sorry, that's not replying to the Samba's point, I guess, but more like my positionality. I think I've been thinking about this a lot. Do I need to be here, or is that right thing to do, or what's the point me being here and things like that. But also I saw myself a great enthusiasm and just excitement to talk about let's talk more about the curatorial practice while I was in Zambia. And I'm genuinely excited about the idea of getting involved in the conversation, or the idea of just initiating something, curatorial from ground up. That excite me. And then I quite like this international working as well. We are talking about Zambia, but we have different background only in this space. But that might create Zambia as well. Also, I am aware of my privilege living in Scotland, which might have a better network, might be useful, some part. I can take more online part of work than Leandro, maybe when he is experiencing power issues and things like that. So I could see that I can be useful. And also now I'm calling Scotland home, and that's the also home for David Livingstone. So it's my responsibility now to talk about this entangled histories, and quite difficult one to talk about. Why David Livingstone statues many of them in Zambia, or why the Moshotunya is called Victoria Falls and things like that. But it's my responsibility now to bring this topic over and over. I thought that there is a probably place that I can use myself useful in this conversations, but it's not charity work or anything like that. One good friend of me warned me that this initiative sounds great, but what you do is not charity work. So that means that this is work. Should be my work. So it's in a way that critical friendship building maybe, or community building, as Kabira was saying. Sorry, it's not answering any questions, but I am aware that this, if there is an uncomfortable bit of me involved in this initiative. Sorry, it's not probably a place to talk about this topic, but yeah, sorry, I stop here.
Hi, can I interject? Yeah. I just want to say to Naoko, I think when you created this, both you and Loyando had this idea and created this space to have a conversation. I think maybe one of the things to mention as we continue to meet, or as other people continue to join, is that this should be a safe space for conversation. And I think partly the reason why I haven't spent that much time with you, Naoko, but from the few times that we've spent together, even though your base is Scotland and you're from Japan, at some level there's also shared historical experiences, and there's a point of view that you understand of what our experience on the continental experience is. And also are aware of some biases that exist as a result of problematic colonial histories. And I think it's important that when we do gather like this, that we should definitely allow ourselves to speak from the space where we're all coming together to repair, because we've also been theorizing this whole idea of epistemic repair. And I know sometimes it feels like it's an us and them thing, where we're saying, oh, they did this to us and therefore we should do this. But there's also the gray area where alliances are formed, connections are made, and reconciliations start happening, and it's in places like this. So I don't think you do have a place, and you can speak your mind, because as long as you're being sincere, which I think you are, and in how the process is being engaged, there's space for everybody. I think the outcome is always what is important, and understanding the clarity with which we're trying to get to that outcome in an open and honest and caring way. So that's why I think even the name of the collective is very good. I just wanted to say that, so that, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It means a lot that the phrase that I have a space, I have a place. Thank you. And then the name, thank you for bringing that up. Leandro and me back and forth, not entirely sure if this is a good name, but in the end, we settled by adding S, like plural S to the cares, because we don't mean to make a collective, if you know what I mean. And we appreciate that, as you say, Samba, really, I really appreciated what you said. But everybody, even though you live in the same community, you have a variety of backgrounds. And when we talk about care, even though just to put all of us on the one same page, we put grocery in the proposal, but it doesn't stop that there are all sorts of forms and sizes and colors of chaos. So it's we thought that adding S felt quite right. Yeah, thank you.
Welcome, Max, and welcome, Angela. Thanks for joining us. I don't know, Naoko, maybe it's a good time. Perhaps you could talk about what we're doing currently with Collective Cares, how we are focusing on the digital space now after engaging the three institutions that we had identified and not necessarily receiving 100% support from them. But perhaps we could talk about what we're doing and what is happening now to just that part.
Yeah, great. So as well as developing this peer-led curatorial community, we are hoping to make an online platform where, as we are talking about the importance of more writing, for instance, the online platform might accommodate more writing on art in Zambia or activities happening or reviews possibly or studio visit, video clips and things like that. So research works that could be a platform for that. And then hopefully the online, the content of it will be developed over time. We are not looking at very fast speed, maybe slowly, but amongst ourselves, peers, if we could develop that over time, that would be great. So if you have something, like for instance, a piece of writing or something, and then, how can we, publish that or distribute that, then maybe the platform could accommodate it. And then we have now Instagram account or Facebook as well. So it would be great to share, keep sharing that kind of critical thinking work. Or as Samba Chibia was saying, that meaning making things, that if that could come about over time, that would be great. So the online platform, but also it doesn't stop us to make a collaborative space in physical spaces, and then we are very, very passionate about to seek out experimental spaces. It's not necessarily institutional spaces. Maybe Li-Fan was saying that what we want to do is the most important thing, rather than asking an institution that, can we use your space, rather than getting the space first. I think we should think about what we want to do first. Then, if we really think institutional space is the best one to realize this, then maybe we can ask institutional space. But Li-Fan was saying really inspirational things. So maybe if this, based on this idea, if we think, the best space for this to realize is actually a cafe space or restaurant, like a closed restaurant space in Lusaka, for instance. If that's the best space to realize it or test or test the collaboration, I guess. So it doesn't stop us to seek collaborations in physical spaces, but I think this hybridity, I don't know what other people think in this space, but hybridity is quite powerful idea, I think, and also quite not sustainable, but it's flexible. Flexibility, that's the word I was looking for. What do you think?
Hi, Nako.
Hi.
Thanks for the update on where you all are at since our initial conversations. I think for me, I'm curious to know, the ethos or the core of what you and Luyando initially wanted to sort of repair, because from my understanding, it was a result of you spending some time in Lusaka following a residency and identifying some gaps, whether it's in curatorial practice or in the way that institutions relate to one another. I think for me, kind of just going back to the initial paranoia piece that Luyando was mentioning, I think for me, I'm just wondering what is, I think, the intention, like what's the end goal? Because I think that there are spaces that are doing critical work, and yes, perhaps curatorial work in Zambia needs to be developed. But I think for me, I'm just wondering, like, what is the gap that we're trying to weave? What's the repair that we're looking to do? Because I'm thinking about the concept of collective cares versus the practicality of what I'm hearing you wanting to do. So I think I'm just wanting to get some clarity on what is it that we feel, that we collectively all here today feel that the Lusaka or the Zambian art space is in need of, and how are we as this collective meeting that? I think is in a situation, some institutions don't want to be critical, to be honest, right? Or they're just there to exist. It's also a very precarious country or space to be an artist, to run a gallery, to run an institution. The museum has limited funds to do the type of work it needs to do. So how do we see ourselves in those spaces? Do we offer up our expertise? Do we work with this? I'm just wanting to know, between the practicality of the space and stuff, what really is the intention and the core of why this collective began? Because I think we kind of brushed over Luyando's question regarding what we thought about the collective cares. And I think for me, before answering that, I want to understand those are just some questions I'm having. I mean, obviously it's something that we're working on and we're developing, but I think for me, it always makes sense when there's a clarity in what we're wanting to achieve versus what the space is in need of and what the space is ready to receive. I think those are the three kind of spaces, at least in my mind, that I'm thinking about, working and living in Zambia, between what I would like for it versus what's possible practically. So, yeah. And obviously, this is not to say that what you've outlined just now isn't essential. I think it's just more understanding the core of the project. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Sana. I guess how that stemmed out was curatorial conversations from my own perspective. It's just me talking. Is when I had the talk at the LUCAG, I guess that I felt the gap of more curatorial conversations should be happening. It doesn't mean that, Sana, you mentioned that before as well, and I appreciate it. There are curators out there and doing great work already. So when we were chatting about the gap with Riando, gaps we see in the contemporary art scene in Zambia, for instance, it's not only Zambia's problem. I guess we see that everywhere. We see that in Scotland as well. But lack of opportunities for artists to showcase artwork or promote, or there is not as many as a mediator type person as artists themselves. That's what I've heard, but just only based on short experience. But seeing those, lack of opportunities, lack of paid opportunities, lack of opportunities to talk about working conditions of art workers, all these art problems. It's actually exactly like this kind of space was missing. We were also talking about gathering with people, talking about what we need, as exactly you said, what we are missing in Zambia, what we need. More like, as Kabira saying, is the community building, he said. Yeah, that kind of feeling. It is the core, I think. And then those platforms are just a way to give practicality, really, to practical space to showcase or promote, possibly sell things. Yeah. So the core is, this space, exactly. The space to gather, safe space to talk about that, what we need. What do you think, Leandro? Oh, sorry, Sana.
No, I'm just agreeing that I think that makes sense. I don't know if Leander wants to add to that.
Yeah, to weigh in, I think starting out the conversation in Naoko was about how at least the three institutions we had identified as contemporary arts institutions, which include the contemporary arts institutions that are operating here in Zambia. Let's say Lukac, Loka, as well as Modzi. We're not necessarily in conversation with each other. So one of the gaps we noticed with Naoko was how it would be possible for a very important exhibition happening at Lukac, let's say at 3 p.m., but then there would also be an exhibition happening at Modzi, maybe at 4 p.m. or even like starting earlier. So it seemed like there were no conversations between institutions, and also just seemed like it felt, or even now when we speak with some of the local arts practitioners here in Zambia, they feel like they feel left out of, let's say, some exhibitions or some happenings here. So we were wanting to start collective cares, and I think it's why I even asked the question that I asked around viability, or even if it was naive to say, there's lots of opportunities that are being left out or missed, that are being left out on the table because, let's say, curators are not being in conversation, but also like this conversation that we're having now with different peers that are interested in the Zambian context. Like, most of the conversations, if are being had, then they are being had in isolation. It's not necessarily like cross institutions or even like, yeah. So those are some of the gaps that we're wanting to address, but also, those are some of the conversations that we're wanting to be having in a sense. So to see how we can introduce a platform that is speaking to like engage with the different artists that are practicing with different institutions, to see how we can have not just one voice, but to see how we can have conversations to see ways in which we can be in conversation in a sense. So also, like I mentioned in part of the introduction, is collective cares. I think at the core, at the center of collective cares, is the peer-led. The structure, in a sense, that we're taking is that it's peer-led, in a sense. So learning from all the different curatorial peers, learning from all the different practitioners who are wanting to do interesting and important work, then seeing how that could shape even the identity that we're wanting to take up, instead of having a kind of up-down way of curating, or up-down model that has only certain that only has certain voices that speak, which almost make them like gatekeepers in a sense. So even I think in some of the conversations we're having, the one-on-one conversations we're having with the peers, we identified that we're wanting to create a strong identity in a sense. So this conversation, the different conversation, the different inputs that we have are what will even shape our core in a sense, I think, if it's in adding to this conversation. I think that's far as how I contribute. Hopefully I've reached out to what you were asking, Sana.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to sort of have these sort of consultations or like conversations, just to sort of identify like what really do the people here on the ground feel like the industry needs, you know. And I think, I suppose this meeting is part of that. But I just wanted us to sort of center and align in terms of where did this idea come from and what is it that we're wanting to actually achieve? What's the intention? Because I think having a clarity on that will allow the project to be nourished towards like and towards like actually its goals. And institutions in Osaka definitely don't converse with one another, but sometimes that's just to do with their own internal politics. So I think what I for me have been focusing on is the future. So who are the future makers? Who are the people who are wanting to curate in the future? And how can we get them to not kind of inherit those types of mindsets or politics or whatever it is, and just work collectively, which is part of the work, or rather part of the reason why I work at Open Window, because I see all of the students there as people who are going to be entering the workforce in art, and how do I ensure that if I had any part in that they know how to work with one another and support one another in their respective projects. So thanks for just sort of aligning us on where this is coming from and what the intentions are, because I certainly want to see that. And I wonder, how can we test out, as you said, Naoko, like the practical ways in which we can do that, but also like how do we incentivize? I think we have brilliant writers in Lusaka. I can't speak for all of Zambia, but for like my network that I have in Lusaka, they may not be art writers. They're brilliant. They think critically, and they're all the people that I have engaged with, and also people outside of Zambia who have a connection to Zambia, who've written about artists, Chibuye being one of them. So how do we incentivize? So maybe collective cares becomes a space in which, we make it attractive for people to want to get into curatorial work or to want to write about stuff, to host, Chichi is doing like wonderful work in Brussels, hosting like private gallery tours independently and giving people her perspective as an independent mediator on what she perceives in that space. So how do we incentivize? I think a lot of times it's just about incentivizing it, or like letting people know that this is an option and that it could be rewarding, whether it's in terms of money or skills exchange, peer exchange. That's at least how I try to think about it. If I'm not able to pay a writer, can I pay them in an artwork? Can we trade? In some way like that. So trying to introduce new ways of compensating people for their work, because there are people who are thinking very critically, but they're just like, who's going to listen to what I have to say, or like, where do I start? This is new to me. But for me, how I've done it is like, I just say, listen, I need someone to write about this exhibition. I know your research deals with this. Are you keen? And they are most of the time. And the incentive is just, being able to put your writing in a different context, but that's because I run the gallery. But now if I wanted somebody to write a show about what's happening at Imvelo or at Luna, all these wonderful new spaces, how do I incentivize? I think that's what it is, because people have thoughts, because we just chitter chatter about them in gallery openings, and we like, have these really great ideas and thoughts, but it's like, this can't just go on my Substack. This needs to go somewhere where it can live and be read. And Chichi's kind of done it in a way where that's kind of her leverage to say, like, I have thoughts about art, and this is where you can read them, and I go regularly to all the shows, and this is what you should see, and what I liked. So it's more like in Zambia the context is different, because it's like, where do these thoughts go? Where do these really wonderful critiques go? Because it's a different context together. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Sana. Thank you so much. I think we're 20 minutes away from wrapping up. I think I only have like a question left, but before I can even head into the question that I have, perhaps Max, you'd like to, sorry if this is putting you on a spot, it's okay if you don't respond, but we had a conversation in Lusaka when you were giving your talk, but also it was echoed today when we met, when we were having a conversation briefly. So I think one thing that has come up in conversations that we've been having is that to grow or even to incentivize like the curatorial practice, there's need to expose Zambian artists or even like local artists to like other ways of practicing, like other practices in a sense. And I think Max had asked about some, or even to the other peers that me and Nauko had asked about some collectives or other practices that are similar, that work similar to the way collective cares has been working. And Max, you mentioned the Black Star Lines at the Kwame Nkrumah University. Perhaps if you'd be interested to weigh in on how some of the similarities that you see, or what's some of the things we can learn from as we're starting our collective cares to learn from the Black Star Lines, and also just some other ways of practicing that can inform how we practice and also how we grow.
Absolutely. Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I'm sat next to like a fridge that's making a lot of sounds, but it's an honor to get to be in conversation with you all. I'm mainly just listening because I don't think I have that much to contribute. I'm very new to the Lusaka art scene and I'm only passing by. For context, for those who don't know me, my name is Max and I'm currently a resident at Lukak. I've been here for 1 month and I have one more month left. And I'm a writer and an art historian. And I curate as well. I first of all just want to say I think a lot of people I meet here are quite apologetic about kind of the Lusaka or Zambian art scene. I've only really engaged with the Lusaka scene so far, but I find it really dynamic and engaging, and I think there's just like really potent work being done. Sana, I see that you're on the call, and I think like what the work that Everyday Lusaka is doing is fantastic. I've like my jaw has dropped every time. So just to start with that by saying like I think there's so much great stuff going on, and I'm even more excited that there's this energy to constantly think about how, you know, the people who are based here and even those who are abroad, how we all can conspire together to make the sort of context even more vibrant and self-critical and engaging with the world. And yeah, I think the point you brought up, which is sort of my one contribution, which was that um, we do ourselves a big disservice when we make ourselves think that we are facing a challenge that no one has ever faced, and that what we're facing is unique to our particular local context. And oftentimes we don't know, not because we're not informed ourselves, but because we're not doing a good enough job to reach people in different places, particularly on the continent, that there are really cool things happening in other countries or in other cities within the same country. And we could learn a lot from working with one another, sharing advice. I used the word earlier, but conspire together is a word I really like. You know, how can we be kind to one another so that we can be dangerous together and really disrupt kind of the spaces that we're engaging in? That's from Ruha Benjamin, by the way. That's not my quote. And so one such example, which has been really important in my own research this past year, is the Black Star Lines Collective, which, for those who may or may not be familiar with, is there's no real world word, I think, to describe kind of everything that they do because they're just so fantastic. But it's, for all intents and purposes, an art collective based out of the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. I know that's kind of a long introduction, but yes. And then there's like a bunch of X's, like black star lines. And they're very cool people, and sort of it involves a range of people, art historians, curators, writers, and primarily artists who are based in and around the Kumasi area. And sort of they're really ushering forward a lot of serious conversations about what art can be in society. I think they have been ushering through one of the sort of professors at that university. Um, Art should be perceived as a gift rather than a commodity, which is a really interesting frame of reference, particularly in a context like Ghana, where Accra, if you're familiar with, is a super sort of commercial hub for African art. And so how do you then, in contrast to a place like Accra, produce scholarship, art that is really self-critical, that is a gift to yourself, to your community, to your society, as opposed to just a commodity that can be traded and sold. And sort of they're quite disruptive. They're part of a university, so that gives its own structure, but also limitations and possibilities. But they will stage exhibitions kind of left, right, and center, and they'll, do it at a pace that I just find almost unfathomable and with very limited resources. And it is out of that collective that many great curators, artists, writers from Ghana are emerging out of. One such example being Ibrahim Mahama. Um, and um, and that was just one example I brought up when sort of the conversation about this collective came up, and I was like, oh well, there are other collectives doing really cool things across the continent right now that you should be aware of because maybe their model could be interesting and adapted. Maybe some of their strategies can be useful to us. I, for myself, can say I've been really inspired by Black Star Lines, and I'm based most of the time in Guinea, and I'm like thinking every day about like how we can do something similar there. Um, and anyways, that's all I have to say, which is that I think the most important thing we need to do as whether we're writers, curators, artists, is to consume a very healthy diet of diverse sort of movements, people, practices happening in different places, such that we are not only exposed to our local scene and like the West. I think it's good to look sideways and think about, oh, well, what are our neighbors doing? What is working? What is not working? And I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but that was just one example that I wanted to bring up. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Max. Thank you. And Lifang, welcome. Lifang had mentioned that she was joining, she was held up somewhere else. So thank you so much for making time for even making it here. So 13 minutes before we close, the last question that I open the floor up to like Q&A. As a platform aims to be a tool for nurturing, not just broadcasting. We're wanting to ask, what would make you as part of the growing network of peers, and also just the artists that genuinely engage with collective cares regularly? Because I think most of our work as we start off is going to be based online, as we haven't gotten enough commitment from the physical institution. So what do you think would make you engage with collective cares more regularly, or even the artists that you perhaps know based here in Zambia? What would make them engage with our platform more regularly? That was an ending question that I had. So if some feedback or even some more questions, I think right now I'll open it up to as a Q&A for like more questions and engagement as we close down in like 12 minutes.
I think one thing I think artists maybe could benefit from is maybe some sort of consulting with somebody who has, experience on the global scale. As Max said, how do we sort of position ourselves on a more global or continental point of view? And I think a lot of times what I have had great joy in doing is positioning an artist's work outside of the immediate context of where it's produced. So I think when I talk about consulting, it's just more about how do we sort of look at a particular artist's work and sort of think of it how it might exist outside of Zambia, and not in a way that obsesses with internationalism, but just to sort of think about its relevance, actually. And a lot of that, I think, is a curatorial task. So that's something that I've had joy in and maybe some challenges in. And part of the practical thing of doing that, it's a very conceptual thing, but the practicality of that is, offering artists edit or rewriting of their artist bios, because that kind of helps them position, sharing references with them as to like which work they could look at that speaks to what their conversation is, whether it's about how the artist has hung the work or presented it, or how they've the materiality and the process, etc., etc. So I don't know if that's what it sounds like we're a service provider, but I'm just thinking about like what is it that artists really need to allow themselves to function not in like a tunnel vision, because a lot of these challenges we're having is because we're kind of just looking at small fish, kind of thing. We need to sort of open up into the ocean type of thing. So that's one thing. I think also, yeah, and part of that positioning conversation is like people writing about the artist's work and not necessarily the person that's curated their work most recently, but just somebody who can look at their work or their recent exhibition and have something published about it, whether it's on Contemporary and or any other like more accessible, very accessible platform, just to sort of create literature around an artist. And it doesn't have, it can be critical, it can be just a short profile. What else? There's so many things, but I think for me the main thing is just that's kind of the two things I'm thinking about, is positioning artists in a way that obviously does not how do I say, like in a way that still honors their intention and what they want to do. Like we're not trying to impose a way of positioning their work, but I think that those are some of the things that could maybe, and that's where Naoko, I think your kind of voice as somebody who's connected to that region of the world, whether it's East Asia or Scotland, right? There's something about that maybe can give it a bit more legitimacy than us here, who are already just working in the space, and people can sort of be like, well, what do you know, right? Which is something I get a lot because I live and work in Zambia. But yeah, I think those are some things. There's more in my brain, but for now, I think that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. The practicalities, and that's so great. These bullet points, but that's exactly kind of, at least in my head, that's exactly kind of thing that I was hoping to offer, I guess, through this collective cares. For instance, we are of course talked about that it would be nice if we have an online platform. There will be this page where we can ask artists that, oh, can I have your artist bio, and then just plonk that into the website. But ideally, if there is at least one, even one conversation will change the perspectives or interpretations. I think so. That's how I think artist studio visit came about, and then also how to yeah, as you say, that how to position artist practice, not, yeah, exactly, as you say, that not imposing them, but more like sometimes, we have the moment that when we talk about our practice, that clarifies ourselves. So that definitely has a thing. But also, sorry, the Max, thank you so much for the point of this collective. That kind of reminded me of that at the moment, our mindset is that very much like seeing art or produce of art, art production as commodity at the moment. Because the artists are, I felt the need of platform or space to promote or to present or to sell. So I guess but that's interesting to think about, that if that's at all possible to think other than commodity, like art, or including our writing or our produce, like even intangible produce. And then, as Sana said, that it might be the case that if we can think about different kind of exchange, like alternative exchange, rather than using money. But I think yeah, at the moment we are raising money, and that's touch upon the point Sana raised, like what did you say? Incentivize, you said that. And very much like we would like to think that what we are doing is actually work, not charity work or, exposures. That's how the exploitation will happen, I guess. So as much as possible, we want to, of course, get paid. So that at the moment, until we get the momentum, we are doing crowdfunding campaign, which is quite slow, of course. And at the same time, we are looking at different funding opportunities. And then when we were chatting with different peers, for instance, Chibuya said that, and Kabira said that as well, I think. It's true that lots of funding sources are foreign sources, and then often one-off, or even though you're great on the first year, but what's happening on the second and the third year, and this sustainable issues always comes with it. So going for the funding opportunities, we are a bit reluctant to that at the beginning, but for instance, Chibuya gave us a great confidence that maybe, until we get the momentum, or at least at the beginning, it might be an idea to apply for some funding. So we are looking at some pots, and then trying to apply for some fundings. So we chatted a lot, and Lifan didn't speak yet. I hope she can join in the conversation, but yeah.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm so late. I just came back. I'm still following the conversation, so just to say hi, everyone. I'm Li Fang, especially for Shibuya and Kabila, right? We haven't met online, and Max, I just heard what you're talking. Yeah, so I will listen first, and then maybe tune in where I can.
Right now, the floor is open to any views, any comments, any suggestions as we close. Because I think even right now, Zesco on my part has done me a good one. And yeah, so I might fall off at any point. But as we wrap up, any views, any comments yeah.
Hi, mine is perhaps just a practical note. Again, thank you, Sana, for kind of grounding us back into the direction that was set out. It was also a good update because, the initial conversations we had, there was still a lot of ideation in terms of exactly like what is practical and what is best to focus on. And Naoka, like you briefly also gave a small like update in terms of what you're focusing on now. So maybe that would be interesting in terms of thinking of next steps and the kind of ideas you would like to now move forward with.
We are raising fund at the moment, and then at the moment looking for funding opportunities. This crowdfunding planned to stop at the mid of February, and then we got the URL through Squarespace because seems like they are good at e-commerce functions. So our idea is that they're slowly building the design across the New Year and March time, and then at one point we hope to launch the web platform. With first one, I think Riando is doing some research. So first of all, to publish Riando's thing, and the idea is that the web platform has a top page, and that will rotate every 2 months. And then in the ideal world, I'm talking about. So every 2 months, each peer contribute like a article or anything they want to share, and then that will rotate every 2 months. And just to kickstart Riando first, and then I might try to write something, hopefully based on studio visit, and there will be artist page. Yeah, the first idea was that this will be a membership-based platform, so that artists may be able to pay small fee so that they can have almost like their not shop, but they have a page, and then where there is a function of they can promote and they can sell work.
I think that's perfect. That's the best thing, I guess. To have a good portfolio of artists, it's the best way to go with. Always good. Yeah. But from my side, I want to say thank you for hosting us. It's just great time and learn quite a lot from each of us intervention. It was quite good. Thank you for gathering us. Yeah.
Well, at least me, I don't know what Riando think, but need quite lots of input and support because I have to admit that I'm really, really new to the Zambian contemporary art scene. So, but yeah, it's a dilemma, isn't it? I want to ask input, but I'm aware that I'm using people's time, so I shouldn't ask too much time of people.
Yeah, I think this could be, I don't know, it might not be a very good closing note, but then with respect to everybody's time and input, and also, yeah, so that it's so that we may invite the peers back and not necessarily eat up a lot of your time. We're super grateful. I'm super grateful now, and I'm super grateful that you made time to join in. And yeah, like starting with this first conversation with most of the peers in the conversation, are hoping this is a very strong point for us to really build our identity and also figure out our next steps. So I think this might be a very good point to like close in. So thank you so much for joining in. We close down the conversation. Hopefully we invite everybody else for the next steps that we take. So yeah, I think this is bye for me, and then we speak later.